Hello and welcome to the Seahawkers podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Schultz, and I am joined by a couple of my good buddies. We've got Clinton Bonner and we've got Adam Emmert, and we are talking quarterback contracts because we got to see some quarterback contracts this past week with Tua Tagovailoa of the Dolphins getting a new deal. We saw Jordan Love getting a new deal. And I wanted to take a look and see how it compared out to our quarterback, Geno Smith. Adam, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I think this is an interesting discussion. Clinton and you had brought up this idea a little earlier last week of, hey, when Tua gets paid, let's talk a little bit about, the differences between Tua and Geno, because a couple of quarterbacks that I do think have similar opinions in terms of there's a group of people that are like, no, they're actually good. And then there's a group of people that are like, no, he's actually not good. And I think that's very similar for both Tua and Geno. And then Jordan Love obviously getting his deal. It's going to be a lot of monies for Mr. Love. I don't know that we have the total numbers here yet, Clinton, but what did you think about those two signings between Tua and Love? I almost said Tuna and Love.
The big tuna. Yeah, the big tuna. Hey, look, I don't blame those teams for doing what they did. They believe they have their guys, and they believe those guys can take them to a Super Bowl and hopefully and maybe win. Not hopefully win. I don't want either of those teams to win. I personally I'm more sold on Jordan Love after what I saw for the last half of the year there. But that's a big risk, and I know we'll talk about that too. It's like he did it for basically a little, maybe over half a year. Tua has done it now for a couple of seasons, but with Tua, nobody seems to be talking about him as an injury risk. And I'm not wishing the guy to get another concussion. Absolutely not. I don't want the guy to get knocked the wrong way. But it just seems to me like nobody's even bringing that up, that like, hey, he's had some major knocks to his head that have kept him out of weeks on end. And so there's big risk there too. So, hey, I mean, it's the NFL. There's going to be a risk with any quarterback, but the pricing in the $53 million range, and these dudes getting Joe Burrow kind of money, just below Joe Burrow money, it's interesting. And I know, Brandon, we want to talk about what it means in relation to our guy, Geno, who maybe doesn't make quite that much money yet.
Not quite yet. In fact, it is a pretty significant difference. When you look at, we just have the basic numbers right now, and it's always weird when contracts initially come out because there's usually things in there that change in terms of guaranteed money. But just the top level numbers, Jordan Love, 4 years, $220 million, and that is an average salary of $55 million, 21.5% of the salary cap for the Packers.
Spicy.
Yeah. And then Tua, his contract number, not too different. He's actually right behind Love in terms of the contract value. And he's at $212 million over 4 years. So 53.1 and 20.8% of the Miami cap. So both guys kind of, if you looked at where guys got paid this offseason, Trevor Lawrence, $55 million a year. Which lined up with the Joe Burrow $55 million a year deal. So, yeah, everybody's kind of been in that 53, which is where Jared Goff was, 53 to 55 million in terms of their average annual salary. And then you look at Geno Smith with his 25 million average.
Yeah, a big difference there. Over double now for Tua per year over Geno Smith. And is he worth double? Is he twice the quarterback that Geno Smith is? And I mean, we got a lot of different things. I know Clinton did a little deep dive on a couple different areas between these two quarterbacks. Brandon, you did as well. But I've got some of the more basic stuff here to kind of start with let's kind of compare. Like, is Tua really 2 times more of a quarterback than Geno Smith? So if you look at the last 2 years for these two players, Tua finally gets with Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill and has his best 2 years of his career, right? Geno finally wins the starting job in Seattle and starts for the last 2 years. So let's compare their overall numbers, kind of your basic stuff, for each of these two players for the last 2 years. So completion percentage, one player was at 67.05%. The other player, 67.25%. that a big difference, boys? Is that twice as much difference?
That's about a push.
That's about a push. All right. So Tua at 67.05, Geno at 67.25 completion percentage. Let's talk about yards. Even though yards don't really matter, let's talk about yards. People like looking at it. Fantasy nerds like looking at it. Geno had 7,906 passing yards over the last 2 years. Tua, 8,172. So basically a 270-ish yard difference, Clinton. Is that twice as much quarterback from Tua as Geno Smith?
The math, no, it is not. That's math I could do even live. So no.
Okay.
It is not.
All right. Now, as much as I disdain yards in terms of that being a value
yards
of
per
a
game would probably be a little bit better because of that would factor in injury issues, but
sure. And I think Geno played two more games than Tua over the last 2 years. It's pretty close.
Yeah, something like that. It's
pretty close. So what I think is a little more telling is touchdowns and interceptions. So Tua, 54 touchdowns, Geno, 50 touchdowns. So a difference of 4. Interceptions, Tua had 22. Geno had 18. So 4 fewer for Geno. Boys, is that twice as much quarterback production in terms of TDs and interceptions?
I'm surprised how similar the two are.
It surprised me too, to be honest. I thought it'd be a little bit more decisive. But I do think that when you look at two other variables here, first is just rushing yards and touchdowns, because, Tua is not a mobile quarterback. He's not a statue, but his mobility is not amazing. He's had 144 rushing yards over the last 2 years and 0 tugs. 0. Geno's had 521 rushing yards and 2 TDs over the last 2 years. Yeah, that's a massive difference there. That's more than
Geno's
twice
not
the QB.
super mobile either.
No, but
he's a chain mover. He knows how to pick up third downs with his legs when he needs to, and also probably the fear, or the less of a fear, of getting hit in the head, because Tua has taken major knocks to his noggin and probably told after a while, hey, no, don't just it's okay. Live to play another day. It's got to factor in.
Oh, 100%. And so like you said, Brandon, this was surprisingly similar overall, but I think this is the thing that really distinguishes these two guys. Tua with the Dolphins last year, he was pressured. The Dolphins gave up, it was something like 15% pressures over the course of the year for Tua. That puts him 4th in the league. So the higher the number, or the lower the number, the better. So if you're first, you're doing a little bit better. So 4th in the league, not pressured hardly at all to put up those numbers. Geno was the 27th most pressured quarterback in the entire league. Like that, it's about as bad as it gets. And he's still putting up the same kind of numbers as Tua. And I think that is really the difference, Brandon.
That's really where I saw the most difference between the two. And because when you look at quarterbacks, if you're a starting quarterback that is good, like your numbers out of a clean pocket, they should be good. Like you should be able to throw accurately as a starting quarterback just from a clean pocket. And, once you start seeing those numbers drop, they're probably not one of the top guys. And there was a difference, though, in the number of, kind of the completion percentage and that sort of thing when it came to Tua under pressure, though, versus Geno. And because when I looked at the PFF numbers, he was under pressure about 25% of the time, Tua was. His completion percentage under pressure is only 40%.
Woof.
Which not real good. And Geno, not a ton better, but it's 50%. So, but he was under pressure 40% of the time versus 25% of the time.
But real quick, Brandon, like 40 to 50, it might not sound like a big difference, but when we're talking about percentages, like of the percentage, that's a huge jump better. That is what, 20% better? Is that correct? Like 10 out of 40, right? That's a 20%.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant difference.
Right. Yeah.
It's just
that's one out of every 5 throws from Geno under pressure were way more accurate than Tua. Right. Like that's quite a big jump right there. And what do you got, Adam?
Oh, I just had a question. So, Brandon, is the list up there in front of you? Do you know who number one in completion percentage under pressure was and what that percentage was out of curiosity?
I don't have a list
Okay.
of who is the best.
Just for context, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, who do you think would be the best?
Let's just say Mahomes.
Okay. Yeah, because I can pull up Mahomes' pressure rate and see if just how different he is. And I pulled up Jordan Love's too just to see, and he was right at 49%. So not a whole lot different than Geno. And Mahomes 49%. So yeah, I think probably going to be any good quarterback is not going to be a whole lot higher than about that 50% rate. Let's look up Purdy just for.
I was gonna say because Purdy gets the people
50,
seem to still
55%. So yeah, Purdy quite a bit higher.
Good decision maker, and that is again that's a nice jump right
there.
Well,
that was another thing that jumped out at me too, looking at Tua's pressure numbers, is that just how when he's blitzed, because sometimes you'll see a drop in average quarterbacks when the blitz rate versus non-blitz rate. So just to give you an idea, completion percentage for Tua when kept clean 76%, when he's not blitzed 70%, and then when you're blitzed you'd expect that to be a little bit different because you got to usually you have to move a little bit quicker, and it can cause drops, that sort of thing. But 69% not blitzed, 68% when blitzed, and so that was just a little bit eye-opening too.
And that was Tua, right?
Yeah, that was Tua.
Well, I think just quickly though on that part, I think that is more in my, the way I would look at that is I think that's more of a affirmation of McDaniel's ability to get the ball out quickly when there's a blitz, because his scheme is pretty versatile. He used motion, I think, the most in the entire league. And I think there was always that like hot route or just, escape vessel. Like, okay, you see this guy come off the edge, you know where you're going. And a lot of not dink and dunk, but just horizontal stuff against the blitz and super rapid pace. The Dolphins ran a lot of plays last year too. And I think that's also one of the reasons he was only whatever it was fourth when it was pressure rate too, because a lot of it is getting the ball out really, really quickly, 2 seconds and under. So I think that all kind of compiles to helping Tua's cause and making it the inverse, making it a bit more difficult on Geno last year. So his numbers, I think, shine a bit more even when you just compare, if you're trying to make it more apples to apples.
And I think that's where you'd probably too have to dig more into the actual tape to decide if it is Tua recognizing the blitz and making a quick decision versus that just being the play call in a situation where they blitz and he's just running the play as called. Because I think those numbers, you try and you want to think that it means that he's making good decisions and that sort of thing. And maybe it does. I just don't know if you can go quite that deep.
Well,
but yeah.
Even if he's not, he's still executing what the coach wants him to do, right? Yeah. So there's still credit there. It's not like taking away credit. It's more just like reflecting on Geno probably had it harder to still get the numbers he achieved.
And so, it shows that he was, when you look at the pressure numbers, I mean, he's helped out by his offensive line more so than Jordan Love or Geno Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, two things can be true at once, right? So the idea of Tua making the right decision, getting the ball out quickly versus McDaniel just having the answers in an offensive scheme that makes it easier for him to beat the blitz or beat pressure. Like it can be both those things at the same time. McDaniels can give him a fantastic answer in these situations with the play call, and then Tua can execute it well. And I do think that anybody objectively, if you're going to say, is Shane Waldron's scheme more conducive to success for a quarterback than Mike McDaniel's, like there's nobody in the world that's going to claim that, right? And not only that, but look at the support in the run game in the difference between Tua and Geno. When the Dolphins are right, in the weather is warm and they can play that style of football, they run the holy piss out of the ball. And I think that makes a big difference for Tua there.
Yeah.
With you 100%. And again, they run a lot of plays, but when Mostert was right and HN or HN, however you do say it, very dangerous team. And spreading it out, right? Being a much more open, like the ability to create space in that offense. Again, back to McDaniel's scheme a little bit, McDaniel's scheme. I also think with our change of philosophy and offensive coordinator, I would think we're gonna gear more towards a Dolphins offense than, let's say, the Waldron offense last year. It's gonna look different, of course, but I think it'd be a bit more similar towards that than away from it, is my guess, Brandon.
Yeah, I think that's the hope anyway, that you move more toward that way than a scheme maybe we weren't quite so happy with Shane Waldron, but
Yes.
that there's other challenges that could come with that too. I mean, the offensive line, we're still going to have questions about, I think, until we actually see it. I'm curious because that was one of the things, paying some of the players that the Dolphins chose to pay. They lost one of their top left guards too. And that could make a big difference over how Tua performs here coming up this season. So, it's the money part of it is tough because with Jordan Love, I feel like it was a little bit easier for the Packers to make that call because he took him to the playoffs, won a playoff game, still a young quarterback. They pretty much had to make a decision this year. And I guess with Tua, it's kind of a similar situation for Miami because what are you going to do if you don't pay him? And, they have all these other pieces. I feel like they're in that mode to where you don't want to take a step back at quarterback. And I don't think that you can it's just, you're going to find a guy that you can plug and play because quarterbacks don't grow on trees either.
I think in terms of systems, I think Mike McDaniel and his offense is about as plug and play as it gets. I mean, him and Shanahan, obviously he comes out of the Shanahan tree. Look at every single quarterback that Shanahan has plugged into his offense, and they've played relatively well. One of the things that, going back and watching a little bit of Tua stuff today, just to, kind of get a little refresher in the memory and all that, just being like, man, Tua plays a lot like Jimmy G. Doesn't have that arm, isn't all that mobile, doesn't attack you outside the hashes very much. But boy, those 10 to 15 yard slants and that sort of thing, you betcha he can play on time and do the thing. And honestly, are you telling me that you couldn't take Baker Mayfield and throw him in that Miami Dolphins offense and get?
Well, he wasn't available.
Well, I get it, but I just talking about, the ilk of quarterback, right? He was available last year. It's not like, Baker's been wrapped up for the past 5 years and you couldn't go get him. The Bakers of the world and that sort of quarterback, like, they're out there year in and year out to go and get and not have to pay the same sort of salary that you are Tua. Like, I think this is a massive mistake. For example, if the Seahawks were to go out and give Geno this $30 million a year quarterback contract right now, I'd be totally against it. That'd be a massive mistake. He's not that kind of dude. Like, he's damn good, but he's not top of the market, $53 million a year good. Same thing with Tua. I think that there's a lot of dudes that you could go out and plug and play into that system and have them look pretty good. Hell, Skylar Thompson looked pretty freaking good in that offense there for a second when he was filling in.
Yeah, I think if they knew that Skylar Thompson could take over, right? I think they've probably seen enough of him in practice to know exactly what he could do. But I think if you're looking at, just with age and ability, I don't know if, Baker might be your best argument for it. But like you said, he was available last year. He did get a contract this offseason, but I don't think he was necessarily going to leave. I don't think that the Dolphins would have been able to woo him away from Tampa for a similar amount of money. Maybe they could.
Why?
I just, if you're in one place, like, why are you going to go to Miami? Maybe. I think it would have been tough for Miami to orchestrate that in a way that made sense. I don't know. But
I think the part that might be interesting to extrapolate though is if we were to extend Geno, because Geno comes into camp, and I realize it's best shape of life season. I know exactly where we're at. However, the dude looks great. He looks fantastic, right? He I think he's geared up to have his best year as a Seahawks starter in 3 years. We'll see how it all goes out. And at what point do you say, okay, we're going to extend the 33, 34-year-old, and we're going to give him three or four more years, kick the can, do the, the wizardry things that we're going to do, lower some cap, but get some more years. And then what number is comfortable? Because if, let's say, well, it is 55 is the new watershed, right? That's what everybody's now chasing. Okay. I agree with Geno's age and the fact that he just hasn't done it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I don't think he's ever going to achieve the top part of the market. But what did Cousins get? 45? Didn't Cousins just get 45?
He was, 45, per average per year over 4 years. Yeah.
Right. So just as a barometer, does that become like a, hey, if we, and again, this is with cap wizardry, right? So you're going to do some things and get some money back the year you're doing it. And when should Schneider maybe, let's say it's week 7, week 8, and Geno is hotter than a pistol, like then, or is it too late?
No, I think you wait until the end of the season and negotiate it. And if he is playing at that level, then you go to 45 a year.
Yeah. And what if he's playing phenomenally? And then it's just like, well,
I don't think you get higher than 45 a year.
I'm not saying he will. I'm just putting it out there that let's say he really blows it out. What might that sound?
If he wins us
like?
a chip, then sure. Pay him whatever.
Right? That's it. We could crowdfund his raise, right?
Yeah, let's say he goes for 4,500 yards, completes 68% of his passes, throws 32 TDs and 10 picks, and they go to the divisional round and lose a nail biter and don't quite make it to the NFC Championship game. Like, what's that worth per year to you guys? Because that would be a blow it out kind of year for Geno to me this year. I mean, maybe he can be better than that. That would be amazing. But you asked the question, Clinton, what number are you comfortable with if you're going to extend him? The number that popped into my head before knowing where Kirk's at and that sort of thing was about 40. That's where it feels like to me. But if he has that sort of year, does that make you, Clinton, think sure, 53, 55, get it done?
What it makes me think is that somebody will give it to him. Is what it makes me think. Because
he's still under contract for 2 years.
Yes, he is, but he could do do the holdout thing, of course, but that's where you negotiate, right? So so put it this way: the contract that he signed and that Schneider got done was really, really solid. Hence, I think the point of this episode, right? It gives us flexibility, and yes, he can come in and negotiate if he blows it out. We'll see what happens. Long season, but with all that, I think at that point, if he had that kind of year, 45 and 32 with that low touchdowns, I think he has earned at that point probably a $50 million salary, if not $45 million, because you could do something that's hey, it's 2 years. You know what I mean? You could do something that's not 2-3 years, but one of the years is a tear it up type of year that you can get out of contract wise. And I think at that point, he will have earned it if he puts up that kind of year, which I think is also okay. It's not because why? Because the next year, somebody is going to go get 57 or 58. It's going to only increase from Burrow, right? So looking at, and the cap will go up. So that's kind of the range, I think, if pretty big, but if he hits those kind of numbers at him. But Brandon, how about you, man? Do you feel like that's,
the only thing I would say about the contract piece of it, I think any quarterback, you're probably looking at 3 years. You're probably looking at paying one more year than you really want to. You just generally don't see those tear it up years at the end of the year, at those end of those contracts for quarterbacks. You generally look at those contracts and you say, oh, if you trade them away or, it gets to that point, you're kind of stuck with paying that, that little bit of penalty for getting rid of your quarterback at the end, like we did with Russ. And now what the Broncos are dealing with Russ.
Yeah.
So, that's generally, I think, what you end up seeing. And even the Vikings, they're paying for Cousins, I think they had to pay a year of Cousins. So, or wait, was he at the end of his deal? Anyway, you generally see a year where you're paying for a quarterback who's not on your team.
It happens quite a bit. I think Cousins, he became a free agent. I think he was at the end of his deal. And now they also paid guaranteed money year in, year out to Kirk as well. So, they had their own little penalties.
He's a little bit of a unicorn as far as contracts have gone.
Yeah. It's difficult
because he's right at that median line of a guy that you don't want to pay top of the market, but there's another team waiting to pay him near the top of the market. And it's happened to him, changing teams twice now.
He has navigated free agency extremely well, right? So, and he's played good ball to pair with it. It's not like he goes out there and stinks it up, right? So he has done certainly enough, and he's had a heck of the way it's kind of been paced for him. And when he became free agent,
he's just Flacco'd his way through his contracts without winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, I think in today's day and age, the amount of good quarterbacks that we have it's much higher. I mean, from top to bottom, I think the depth in terms of quality is way higher. Like I heard somebody talking on one of the Talking Face shows the other day, and they're going through their, top 5 quarterbacks, right? And upset that so-and-so isn't considered a top 5 quarterback. And it's like, shoot, your top 5 should be a top 12 anymore. Like, like there's a, top 7, a top 15. And then, I think tiers make more sense these days in terms of trying to rank these quarterbacks out rather than being like, well, he's a top 10 guy or he's not a top 10 guy. So I don't know if you agree with that, Clinton, but I think that's going to be interesting going forward in terms of the quality is so much higher as a whole that I think some of these teams are going to look at a player like Tua or Lawrence or somebody like that coming down the line and be like, no, I'm paying you the richest quarterback contract in the history of the league. Like, you're going to get 75% of that and like it or don't. I don't care. Walk. We'll find another one because there's that many good quarterbacks.
I thought that guy would be Daniel Jones, and it wasn't Daniel Jones.
It blew right past. Right? It's blown past him, right? So, that was 40, right? So it's just to show how fast it's been increasing. And with that, Brandon, a lot of things that Adam was saying about the depth of quarterback and tiers, I got to tell you, man, makes me think of fantasy football, which I know Adam is a huge, huge fan of fantasy football. But
love it.
A lot of the talk around fantasy right now, if for folks that really play it a lot, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to dive into that supports the conversation, not just about fantasy football, but there's lots there that are like, hey, if you're in like serious leagues, you don't typically take QBs first rounds for round 1, round 2. You just wait on them. And then there's a lot of folks philosophically who are like, hey, look, the 12th quarterback versus the 8th or 7th or 6th, they're really, really close to each other when it all washes stats wise in the fantasy world, right? But I think it also is coming through in what you're saying, Adam, that no, in the real life too, there's a pretty big glut nowadays of folks that are like, no, it's a pretty good quarterback. And then there's small variances. And then, yes, there's a top tier. Then you've got your Mahomes, your Allen, et cetera, maybe your Burrow, depending on who you put up there. But one of the shows I really like is Fantasy Football Today. And a couple of years ago, they had this guy, his name is Jacob Gibbs. It's at JA Gibbs _23 on Twitter. Very good follow. He has a segment or a show they call Beyond the Box Score. So it's way more analytical and what the heck's happening. They just did 15 minutes on a projection show like 2 days ago. And I texted you guys, I was like, hey, minute 53 for those that want to go find it. It was called Projection Show. And again, Fantasy Football Today. Couple of really interesting things when he dove into Geno Smith. And this was not about Tua or Love. He was just making the case that Geno is a heck of a lot better than what people have been, giving credit for in the last 2 seasons. So the first thing he looked at was the Seahawks were the only team in the NFL to run under 1,000 plays. We ran 995 offensive plays. Only team. The other teams around us that were like still over 1,000. Here's some barn burners, boys. Titans, Raiders, Broncos, Patriots. So not good. Those are not offensive powerhouses. Now, right above that was the Niners. And that kind of speaks to their efficiency and just how good they were efficient-wise. But with that, a couple of reasons, and this is where it starts to get very interesting, I thought. Number one, Seattle does still have a high rate of explosive plays, so that's a positive, but it does take away their volume. And that's kind of Pete Carroll's philosophy for all these years, right? He wants to have run the ball and explosive plays through the air. And so Seattle still did that higher than the average Bear last year. So that's a positive that the talent is there, but they still didn't run that many plays or the least amount of plays. Number two reason that they cited was the Jets and Titans were the only offenses that lost more EPA, which is expected points added, via pre-snap penalties. So the Seahawks were the third worst in the league. So when it's EPA, it's not just like, oh, the volume of pre-snap. That's certainly a factor. It's also when and where. When on the field, where did you suffer these basically unforced errors? Seattle's third worst. They're drive killers. We were also high in giving up sacks, another drive killer. So he puts that all in the blender, and then he pulls out this last stat, guys. I'll just keep on rocking here. Since 2021, the number one overall completion over expectation rate, they call it CPOE. So it's an algorithm that looks at your completion rate and then which ones were basically that the algorithm saying is like, that was a very tough, catch that was made there, completion that was made that should not have been made. Geno Smith is number one in the last 2 years. The other three dudes, let's take some guesses. Brandon, first off the board. So CPOE, 2 years in a row, Geno's one. Who do you think is on the board? Three other guys.
I'll go with Mahomes.
Mahomes is on the board. He is not the top answer, which means, Adam, Family Feud rules. Who do you
He
like?
can steal.
Survey says Josh Allen.
Josh Allen is not on the board. And,
Oh,
all right,
he was
Brandon,
second
back
big
to you
time
for the
throws.
win.
Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, well, big time throws is not CPOE.
But not completion over expectation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which basically means that he's completing balls that they don't think should have been completed, right? It's like the rate at
It's
which
like fitting it into a tight window,
Exactly.
or where a receiver makes a great play that kind of helps the quarterback out.
Correct. So Mahomes is on there. He's second. So
Okay.
I mean, guys,
is it somebody who played all year last year?
he was hurt earlier in the year. Remember, it's a 2-year span since 2021.
Because I was going to say Burrow.
Burrow is number one. And I'll just give you number three. Rodgers was number three. Obviously, that was only 1 year of play, which was, by the way, his last year in Green Bay, which he wasn't that good. And yet he was still fourth on this list. But the point being, guys.
Those are some good names.
Yeah, Burrow, Mahomes, and Rodgers. Not bad. And Geno's above them. That he's the first in CPOE. So there's two more stats I thought were really, really compelling, just to compile the idea of like, Geno might be worth that $50 million. I think that's what I'm kind of getting at, if he has the kind of year that you talk about, Adam. Geno and Trevor Lawrence were the only two quarterbacks last year that lost 4 touchdowns because of defensive pass interference in the end zone. No other quarterback in the league had more than 3. So everybody else was 2 or under. So Lawrence and Geno kind of got robbed that way. And then Geno was 4th in the league with defensive pass interference yards. So he loses those yards because Tyler Lockett goes out and does Tyler Lockett things, and we get a 35 or 40-yard gain. And he was 4th in the league with those yards, but they don't count as yards. But so they track that stat as well. So you put all those things in a blender over the last 2 seasons, and you go, man, if Geno does what you were saying, Adam, I don't know. I think he might be worth that $50 million coin. So what do you think after hearing those stats?
Yeah, I mean, compelling numbers for sure. And one of the things that I think lends credence to your argument here is just looking, let's go back to just Geno versus Tua, right? A guy who just got paid that $53 million a year type contract. Last 2 years, Tua's had 4 fourth quarter comebacks. Geno has had 6. He tied for the lead with Russ last year somehow with 4, Geno did. And when we talk about what is a quarterback's true worth, I think one of the biggest things that we need to take into account is completion percentage under pressure, like you were talking about, Brandon, right? Like, what do you do when the bullets are coming at you hard? Like, and then what do you do in crunch time? And Geno Smith has shown that he can be an excellent crunch time quarterback. And, you combine that with, some of the stuff that you were bringing up here, Clinton, and okay, maybe you could talk me up to 50. Maybe you could talk me up to 50. And also, too, knowing that the cap's going to go up considerably over the next few years, as it always seems to.
Well, and so let's think about that too, because we're talking completely average average over the course of the contract. And the thing that's going to be tough to do with Geno, even to get him close to 50, is that he's set to make a cap hit of 38.5 in that final year of his deal. The Seahawks don't normally, completely tear up a contract.
Right.
Usually you're going to get that money, but then it's going to be spread out. So even if you put in 38 million for the first year, then you got to put in 55 million average for the next 2 years if you're going to do a 3-year contract. And that averages out to 50. So you have to boost those other year numbers up pretty high, even just to get to a 50 average. That's why I think it might end up even being closer to 45 if that's what if he balls out and they decide that we want to do this for long term, then I think it's possible.
Yeah, well, I like the way you broke it down. So Brendan's sticking with the more Kirk Cousins-y current contract, and Adam.
But that's because, that's what the benefit to Kirk is that he was a free agent.
Right.
So he didn't have that 1 year then you could build in to extend the contract out. Whereas if Seattle finds themselves in that scenario and you're doing, a $50 million year, a $55 million year, it averages out then to, in that 45 to 50 range.
One last thing I'll say about that too is, I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but I still believe that a lot of Geno Smith's contract is still heavily incentive laden, right? So he has the base, but if he does the numbers Adam was saying this year, and then if he does, what does that mean? It means he makes a Pro Bowl. And in your scenario, they made the playoffs, maybe won a game. So there was quite a number there, and you gave like whatever the percentage was. It was pretty good. It was like 68 or something like that you shouted out. So if he had that kind of year, he's going to have those accelerators. And again, great. I mean, he earned every penny at that point. So that's an interesting thing to look at as well. Hey, look, I think if Geno makes every single dime he possibly can make on this current contract, and he's in a position to renegotiate next year, we as Seahawks fans will have a lot to be really happy about in 2024.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is it's a roster bonus escalator, and it's all based on the 2022 season stats. So the season that he went on a tear, he had 4,200, almost 4,300 passing yards. He had 30 touchdowns. He had nearly 70% completion percentage, a passer rating of 100, and 9 wins. And in the contract, it's 9 wins or a playoff berth. So he gets $2 million for each of those numbers. And I mean, those are pretty high numbers to try and hit. And I mean, if you get injured, as we saw last year, right, I mean, you can still hit the completion percentage and passer rating numbers if you get hurt. But those are pretty high numbers.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's unreasonable to think that that's something that Geno can do here over the next year or so. I mean, you just think about the idea of, Ryan Grubb coming in and running maybe a more pass-centric offense. That should be friendly to Geno Smith and quarterback numbers and, meeting those marks. And the other thing is, if I'm
yards,
thinking over
touchdowns, completion percentage is going to be a little tougher, but yeah. A
little tougher in Grubb's offense. You think it's going to be a little tougher to hit those numbers?
I think completion percentage. No, I mean, yards would be easier. Touchdowns might be easier. I'm saying completion percentage and quarterback rating. It could be a little bit tougher because you're throwing the ball more.
It's possible, but we'll see, I guess. I think that it does seem to me anyways, I mean, it's a more quarterback friendly system if it's going to be the Washington offense or some variants of it. So that'll be interesting. But I think looking over the next 3 years, if I'm looking at Tua and giving him that money, and I'm looking at Geno and you're saying, okay, he's played well enough to get that money, who do I think is more likely to live up to their contract? I definitely think it's Geno. I think he's done more with less. That's at least equal to what Tua has put up. And then just looking at the player himself and their physical gifts, Geno has a much better arm. He throws a much tighter ball. He's more accurate. He's more mobile. Everything points to Geno being the guy that you would hang your hat on more than somebody who I think is very dependent on the system and having Tyreek Hill there to throw the ball to and Tua. I think it's kind of a night and day difference when you look at their physical skill sets. And that's why I would lean towards Geno. And some people are going to say that that's heresy, but I think the proof is in the pudding.
Well, it's also the proofs within the conference. I mean, Tua's going to have to go through Josh Allen in his own division. He's going to have to go through Mahomes to get to the Super Bowl. He's got Stroud in the conference. Like, there's a lot of good quarterbacks in
Burrow
the
and
AFC,
Lamar.
and you got Burrow in there too, and Lamar.
And
So yeah,
Rodgers. They're pretty stacked. Pretty
I
stacked.
guess if you want to throw Rodgers in there, you can, but we'll see if he can make it more than 4 plays this year. I'll leave him out, but yeah, Geno has a much better opportunity, I think, of living up to his contract is what we're saying.
Yeah. So I think in short, boys, we have a great deal with a darn good quarterback who is locked up under contract. And as all these quarterbacks are getting paid mega money, we could take the other money that's there, go sign the free agents, go pay retain the guys we got to retain, and go build another championship roster.
We might have to be looking to pay some folks on the offensive line coming up too, especially as Cross gets toward the end of his rookie deal. So yeah, there's places to spend the money. And, if you want to spend a little money on the show, you can go to getintheflock.com. If you don't want to spend any money, but you want to help support us, you can hit that subscribe button, hit the like button out on YouTube, youtube.com/Seahawkers podcast. And you want to be sure you're subscribed, because if we decide to go live, then you get some notifications and you can join us live.
Yeah. And we always appreciate all you guys that do join us live. And like Brandon said, man, if you enjoyed this Tua slander that I threw out here today, then yeah, hit the subscribe button. But I believe in Geno, and I've been saying it along with Clinton and Brandon for the last couple of years here. I do think that he is a cut above a lot of the more average dudes, and I think the stats prove it out. And even though it's kind of, ultimate hype season right now, and everybody's 15 pounds lighter and stronger than ever and faster and all that, Clinton, to your point, it sounds like Geno looks awesome, and that makes me a little bit more excited for this offense going forward this year.
Yes, and I think with that,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.